We are going to talk about sugar cravings, as Sierra mentioned. And what I'm hoping is that, by the end of the presentation, you'll kind of learn maybe why these cravings are present for you. Also, ways in which you can keep them at bay, ways that you can maybe work through them if they do exist. But sometimes it's just the that first word of this title is understanding them. There's so much power in that. So we really like to encourage people to dive deep, and we love the educational side of things. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit more about that today. Following the presentation, as Sierra mentioned, we are going to be making some really healthy, yummy chocolate protein muffins that can hopefully satisfy a sweet tooth, but also give you lots of wholesome ingredients and be something really kind of fun that you can add into your fall baking routine this holiday season. As Sierra mentioned, I have been a registered dietitian for over 16 years now. I've been with Lifestyle for going on, I think 6.5, 7 years. And this is the most fun part, I think, of my job, is being able to do stuff like this where I can educate and do fun stuff like the demos. I love connecting with people in this way. This has been really, really super fun. So I really appreciate everyone showing up and signing up and doing these along with me. We do offer that one-on-one counseling as well. So if you've been thinking about it and you're kind of like, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to do this. Don't let the holiday season deter you. Let it motivate you. Get in the door. Start working on some things now. Don't wait to the new year. So please give our office a call if you're interested. Okay. These are just some key points here, just that we will be working through today. Sierra kind of mentioned a little bit about it there at the beginning, but I'm hoping that you're going to be able to understand, first of all, the difference between added sugars and naturally occurring sugars. So there is a difference. And the way that we respond to these two different types of sugars is really vastly different. So it's really good that you understand what those differences are. I'm also hopeful that you're going to be able to really unpack, why are my sugar cravings existing in the first place? There's probably reasons that you've not ever thought of. And I'm really excited for you to hopefully uncover some of that today. One of the things that I consistently tell people over and over in my office, in a virtual call, is that this is not because you lack willpower. So go ahead and just strike a pen through that reason, okay? There's more to it than that. It is not because you lack willpower. All right. And then hopefully we can learn how to manage and then prevent. Really, prevention is key here, but these things are going to exist. Some of these cravings are not as much in our control. So sometimes it's good to just learn how to work through them. And then also learning some healthy swaps. What are some things that you've never thought about? That's another fun part of my job, is teaching people, oh, wow, have you tried this before? Oh my goodness, you should totally try it. It's amazing. It's so good. And it's healthy and less sugar than you'd think was in it. So anyway, we're going to talk about a lot of that today. All right. So let's kind of dive into what are added sugars. So you've probably heard the term, I'm sure, lots of times, but what does that really mean? You hear a food is sugary and you shouldn't eat it, but how do we know if something is an added sugar or if something is a natural sugar? So added sugars are those that are, as the term says, added to food and beverages during processing or preparation. They don't just always naturally exist. Some of those sources that you see there, I'm sure, make sense, right? So sugary beverages, that's probably the bigger culprit in the US, is our consumption of sweetened beverages. And that's kind of an area that I think we as a whole at Lifestyle, and a lot of dietitians, no matter where they're at, where they're working, I feel are trying to kind of help people with, is getting it out of those beverages, because there's nothing emptier calorie than drinking that sugar. So, but other foods, processed foods, just in general, anything with a package, I tell people, look on the label. I'm sure that there's added sugars. I bet you didn't even realize it. salad dressings. I'm sure you've maybe kind of gotten used to the fact that certain salad dressings are sweet, but just the amount of sugar that are added to salad dressings. That's one of the just kind of side note here. I feel like making your own salad dressing is one of the most simplest things that you could do. I've done it here before in some of my demos, but one of the simplest things you can do, never a drop of sugar, and it tastes so good. So learning stuff like that over time is really important, but these are just some of those common culprits. So what about how much? How much should we be having? What's too much? So the American Heart Association, World Health Association are two organizations that have kind of put some guidelines behind this question. And it varies slightly, but I think, most of there's a connection here between the two. There's a little bit of variance. So with the American Heart Association, men are kind of kept to less than or equal to 9 teaspoons of added sugar a day. So what does that mean, right? So it means 36 grams roughly and around 150 calories if you're looking at it on a calorie standpoint. And then women less than or equal to 6 teaspoons or 25 grams of added sugar, 100 calories per day. World Health Association is kind of using this percentage of total calories. So somewhere between 5 to 10% of your total calories should be coming or, keeping it less than 5 to 10% of total calories coming from added sugar. So that's a lot of numbers, a lot of percentages, a lot of grams. What does that all mean? There are ways in which you can track this. So someone comes into our office and they really want to know how much sugar they're taking in. We might have them learn how to track that. You can do it on an app. You can write it down by looking at packages and things like that. And then I have some people that are like, no, that is too tedious for me. That feels like a lot. So one thing I feel people connect with a little bit more than number crunching all day long is really kind of just taking it and having these small goals around the behaviors around the sugar. So it could just be, what are we taking in? And I help you figure that out, right? Like what foods are you taking in your day that probably are those bigger culprits of added sugar? How do we work on reducing those? That to me is more beneficial than you going home and number crunching. But some people like data. So we kind of help you figure out which path is best. So for example, someone comes in and maybe they're consuming a lot of juice, maybe they're consuming soda. So we've got a lot of sugary beverages coming into play here. We might work on slowly reducing those. And that's going to cut out a lot of added sugar from your diet, just that alone. And then we might move on to something else. What do you eat for breakfast? What do you have for snacks? What kind of packaged foods do you buy? So that's a lot of what, we're trying to help teach people. Food for thought. So the average American consumes more than 17 teaspoons of added sugar each day, according to the American Heart Association. That's equal to 71 grams of added sugar per day. Way more, 3 times more than what that American Heart Association is recommending for people at that lower level that they're really wanting you to stick to in those low 20s. So where do we go from here? First of all, it's, as the title of the presentation today discusses, it's understanding why. So we're going to get into that here in just a second. And then it's learning how to take that knowledge, use it for power, use it to change. And then a lot of times you need someone to help you facilitate the change, hold you accountable for the change. And that's where someone like myself or a physician or, a medical team, right? So a bunch of people, accountability buddies. I tell people it's not always just about having me or, a dietitian or a doctor in your life. It's about having other people that are understanding what's going on and there for your support. So that's where the change begins, okay? So let's compare this to naturally occurring sugars. So we've got added sugars, which things are, that sugar's been added to the food, but we've got naturally occurring sugars that occur in things like fruit, dairy, grains, vegetables, even nuts. These are sugars like lactose coming from milk, fructose, which is coming from fruit. So research shows that these types of sugars, which are coming from whole foods, foods that have lots of other nutrient density to them. We have lots of other qualities, vitamins, minerals, fibers, things that are doing such good to our health, that these foods, these types of sugars, actually decrease our risk of chronic disease. But we do need to be aware. We have lots of individuals that struggle with blood sugar control for various reasons. And these foods, although they're naturally occurring and they do exist with foods, these whole foods that are such impactful foods for our health. However, these naturally occurring sugars, they still do have an impact on blood sugar. Okay. The difference is when we eat an apple that has that skin to it, that fiber, and we eat that with roughly about 20 carbs, but 4 grams of fiber, that's going to do something slightly different than if we were to eat or drink, 20 grams of sweetened beverage. Okay. There's still other things we need to consider here, but just the two by themselves, if we were to eat them separately, would have very different impacts on our blood sugar control. Okay. All right. So now that hopefully you have a little bit more of an understanding between those naturally occurring and those added sugars, let's talk about sugar cravings for a minute. Why are we having? So there is a biological response and certain things that are happening when we eat foods that have sugar. Okay. So there is a neurotransmitter called dopamine that actually gets boosted when we eat sugary foods. And our body and our mind do respond to that. So our body is responding to it and our mind is responding to it. We're learning that when we eat these foods, hey, we feel really good. So we want to eat more of them. Okay, so that is something that is happening. That to me is slightly out of your control. That's a body reaction. That's a response that's happening. Something that is more in your control are your dietary habits. And that's another reason why sugar cravings can exist, why we're kind of going for the chocolate or for whatever sugary food it is a little bit more, is because we have too many of these processed sugars in our diet. We don't have a lot of balance of those other macronutrients. So to take it back to the 3 macronutrients that are involved when we're eating, we have protein, we have carbohydrates, and we have fat. And so sugar is going to be in that carbohydrate macronutrient category. So when we're eating too many carbohydrates, too many sugary foods without the protein, without the fat involved, we're having a lot of blood sugar dips. We're having a lot of instability there. When our blood sugar dips, we want more carbs to raise it up. So what protein and fat are doing when we're combining the 3 is keeping your blood sugars more stable so that you're not constantly dipping and wanting more. So that is something, that's a big thing that's going on that people just aren't aware of. You might start your day with, cereal and toast. So I might explain to someone, hey, let's try to start our day with cereal or toast, both fine, but they're 2 carbs without a whole lot of protein involved, not a whole lot of fat involved. So let's take one of those carbs and pair it with a protein and a fat. Let's have a piece of toast with some peanut butter and some eggs. That would be a lot different on our blood sugar stability, essentially keeping us full a little bit longer and not maybe seeking for carbs/sugar as much throughout the day if that's how we're eating throughout the day. Okay. An emotional response. We all have had this. I was thinking about this earlier. So kind of taking it and showing you guys, hey, this really happens to everybody, honestly. I think this is where it comes down to the management side of it versus the prevention. We can't always prevent the fact that when we get stressed, we think about sugar. Not everyone thinks about sugar. I know that some people think more savory, but a lot of us think about sugar when we get stressed out. So one thing that I just kind of reflect on sometimes is back when my kids were babies, I can sit here and remember like it was yesterday, crying in the crib, thinking to myself, oh no, why? Why is he crying again? What's going on? Let me go into the pantry and see if that can help me. Right. In the moment, you feel like it can't, though. Dopamine boost, hello, that is going to increase my dopamine. That's going to make me feel better in the moment. Does it help with the rooted issue, though? No, it isn't going to make my 6-month-old stop crying. But in the moment, that's a response. It's an emotional response that's happening. And, we do dive into behaviors with individuals and talk about behaviors with food. And I think that can really help. And then there's a little tool that you can kind of try here in a few slides. I'll go over it with you if you do go through a lot of this emotional response to food. But some of it's in your control and some of it's not. Some of it's what you've been taught. We use food as reward. We've had a really good day or we've had a really bad day. I deserve this, right? So that's something that maybe we've been taught, we've been doing for years. It's hard to just turn that off, but there are things that you can do to help dull that. And I'm going to circle back to that when we just talked about those dietary habits. You can dull these cravings by the way that you eat most of the time. Something that I do have patients understand is that it could truly be a lack of nutrients, a deficiency, and magnesium is a really big one. So we can't get too deep into some of this stuff today, but it's stuff that we talk about in sessions. We actually test magnesium to see what your levels are, just given if that's something that we feel like would be necessary. And a magnesium deficiency can lead to sugar cravings. So magnesium helps to regulate insulin and insulin sensitivity. Ultimately, when we're not as insulin sensitive, we have more carb cravings. And so that's something that is existing for people. That's kind of circling. I'm starting to talk a little bit about hormones here, hormonal changes. Some of that is out of our control. Our hormonal imbalance for certain individuals in certain phases of life is not always in your control. However, there are ways that we can eat to help balance these hormonal responses a little bit differently, which can in turn help with sugar cravings. So it's a lot, you guys, when we talk about the in-depth reasons why you're having these sugar cravings, but I really do encourage you, if this is something that you're really battling, make an appointment, talk to us further about it. It's something that could be enlightening and really helpful and life-changing for you to really dive deep into the why that's happening. Habituation. This is a big one. So how many of you, raise your hands, I'm going to raise mine. Okay. How many of you will, a certain time of day want something specific? All right. And it's usually for me after dinner, right? Like we might want a little something tasty, a little something sweet, a little bite of something sweet. We all can go through that. Not always, but sometimes you might want something sweet. Maybe it is nightly though. That's habituation. That's become a habit for you. It's almost like your brain is turned on. We do this and this and this and that. And, having that sugar is last. So that's something that I always tell people, hey, look, there's nothing wrong with it necessarily. I think it's how we're managing it. Are we taking it to the extreme? Sometimes we need to allow these foods in our diet. I am not someone that says you cannot eat sugar. Okay. I think we need to learn how to eat it. We need to give ourselves the tools and the opportunity to understand when we really do want it and when when we're in control of that food choice, we're deciding to have that right now. That feels really good. I'm going to do it versus it has control over me, right? So I'm being drawn to it. I have to have it. So that's where we want to work towards kind of having a little bit more of a balance between those two. So habituation, some things that I'll recommend to people who are struggling with that is try breaking up your routine a little bit. Right after dinner, go do something else. Do something different. It is gorgeous out. Go take a walk. I get it's getting a little darker and we're going to deal with that even more. So I think daylight savings is maybe even, is it this weekend? Anyway, I don't know. It's coming up. So we are going to have to deal with that, but go break it up. If you are constantly, after I do this, go do something slightly different right after dinner. Try, and I'm going to talk you through something called the 5Ds in just a second. That's what I recommend doing for stuff like habituation or emotional response. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so we maybe have a little bit more of an understanding as to why they could be happening. How do we prevent them or manage them when they occur? Number one, balanced diet. Protein, carbs, fat when you eat. When you have, look at this picture here. And I'm going to show you, this is a really good example of how to fit in something that you think is delicious, like maybe chocolate, but also have other things involved. So chocolate covered nuts paired with regular almonds with some type of maybe chicken, turkey, with some cheese. We've got lots of protein, we've got fat, we've got carb. So we fit that chocolate in as a carbohydrate for this particular example, for this little snack box, or could be part of a lunch. That's something that I think helps. Again, I don't want people to feel like they can't have it. I use this commonly. When we resist, we rebel. You need to figure out a way to have what you enjoy and what you want, but feel like you're having it in this balanced way. So a balanced diet. And so we will work with people on not skipping meals. We don't want people to, kind of not have those 3 macronutrients. We help teach people how to snack. That's really important. I feel like people, just in general, that's a confusing area, is how to properly snack. So learning how to balance snacks, using them for good, not going too long a distance between meals. I'm kind of diving into the structured part here. So structured meal regimen, big deal. Balance and structure. It's always my first thing I tackle with people. First visit. We talk balance, we talk structure. I want to know when you eat. I want to know what you eat. I want to know how you eat. And then we will try to work on slowly molding that and changing that a little differently. Adequate hydration is really important. When we are not hydrated, we do sometimes seek out food. So we want to nourish ourselves with food and with hydration, with water. Not calorie containing beverages as much as you can. That's one area where, like I mentioned before, we would work towards reducing those. Creating more mindful eating habits. That's another big one. We tend to want the sweets at night in front of the TV, or we don't ever want the sweets where we're sitting down at in an area with a plate and eating them without distractions. So we might work on that a little bit. Mindful eating habits can be really helpful. Reducing processed foods, just because processed foods, they don't have as much wholesome nutrition to them, and they usually do have more added sugars. Does that mean you can't have any processed foods? No, it just means reducing them. So again, kind of looking at your day as a whole, is there a part of your day where we're really eating a lot of processed foods here? How can we change that up? Is it just adding, half of your plate, have some salad to it, have some raw veggies with dip? Is there something that we can do to take a packaged food or a processed food out of the picture to kind of wean off that a little bit? It's not always about food, okay? It is about other things. And we talk about these equally. We talk about sleep, stress, and physical activity all the time, just as much as food, honestly. So when we do not have quality sleep, when we're fatigued and we're tired all day long, we crave foods differently. Our blood sugars are different. Cortisol is high. That's a stress hormone that can exacerbate sugar cravings. So that's off when we don't have adequate sleep. When someone comes in, I want to know how you're sleeping. I want to know what your hours are, how you're waking up in the night, how you fall asleep. These are all really important. And so maybe that's something that you've not kind of taken a look at, that you've not tried to figure out. A lot of times it's when you want to tackle your, health, weight, food, it's just thinking about food. But there's so many other things that you need to think through. And sleep is a big one. Stress management is very big, and how we deal with stress is very big. So we'll help people add more tools to your toolbox and trying to minimize the way that we use food for those emotional triggers. Activity, that's a really big one. So I encourage you guys, maybe midday is the best time to do this at this point with the time change and all. Get outside for a walk after you eat. Get yourself moving around as much as you can after meals and throughout the day. So little bits of activity is really important. We also like for people to have structured physical activity too. So we will help people work through realistic regimens for themselves. But being active is going to help it's going to help with insulin sensitivity. It's going to help reduce cortisol. These are all hormonal responses to why we want food in a certain way, why we want sugar. So an activity can help with stress, which again can be a reason why we want sugar. So it's a big deal to have a combination of these things. And then finding alternatives. So that's a fun, like I said, fun part of my job is helping people figure out, oh yeah, have you not tried that? This is really good. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. I thought that was the next slide, but I have some examples of some fun products that you can go home and try. This is a strategy that I want you guys to try when you're having a moment where you're like, I really want something right now, but I'm not hungry. That's part of it. Again, having the food, not the biggest deal. But if we're not hungry, we recognize that it's out of stress or boredom or anyway, this is something that I think could be helpful. And the only goal from this strategy is for you to learn something from it. There is not a goal of avoiding the food that you're desiring. So it's called the 5 Ds. The first D is delay. That's what I was talking about before. I was saying after dinner, just take a walk out of the kitchen and delay it for a minute. If you're thinking, I really want something else, but I'm full. I don't necessarily need it right now. That's something that I tell people. This is sometimes really difficult mentally, but if you tell yourself and use lots of different concepts and strategies as well, telling yourself something like, hey, I can have some of this later when I'm hungry again, but I'm not hungry right now. I'm full, but I can have some again later. So delay yourself, distract yourself, go for a walk, do a task, do something. Distance, again, is part of this plan. So when you delay and distract, walk away from what it is that you're maybe craving, and then determine maybe how you're feeling. So you can set a time limit on this. You don't have to set a timer necessarily, but give it at least a couple of minutes and then determine, how am I feeling? Okay, let me make a decision now. Do I feel differently? Okay. Do I still want it? Okay, I do. So what do we do then? What if we still want it? We still want it. What I tell people is, well, your impulsive reaction is down significantly, even in just those couple of minutes. You're not going to grab as much. You're not going to eat as much as you would have if you had decided right then and there, like, I'm going for more. You've you've taken a little bit of the edge off just by walking away for a couple minutes. So go back, mindfully have some, portion it out, put it on a plate, sit down and eat it without distractions. So that mindfulness approach can be really helpful as well. So anyway, 5Ds, I think, is a great tool if you've never tried anything like that. All right, some healthy swaps before we get to making our muffins. So maybe you've seen some of these before, you guys, and there's other things, but these are just some things that I kind of recommend and came to my mind. So Yasso ice cream bars, a really funny story, y'all. During the pandemic, these really were my thing. Okay. I had a lot of Yassos in this house, and it's a period of time where you look back and you're like, wow, I remember this is funny and I can only laugh now. There was a time where I was doing the online grocery shopping and going and getting my groceries. I also was driving like 25 minutes to the grocery store because the one near me you could never get anyway. I don't know if y'all did anything like that, but man, thank goodness we're not doing stuff like this anymore. So anyway, they forgot my Yassos and I got home. It was just about tearful. I mean, that was how upset I was. I couldn't believe they forgot my Yassos because this was baby face for me, for my little guy. Put him down for bed, talk about habituation. I would put him down for sleep. I would come out and get a Yasso. There are worse things, yes, right? So, but still, these are things that I have people think about. Why are you grabbing the food every single night at this exact same time? But Yasso bars are really, in my opinion, good. They have a little bit of protein. They're made with Greek yogurt. They're single serve, which is always nice when it comes to ice cream. The little true frus, maybe you've seen these before. They're really good. Love a dipped almond. So a nut with a little bit of chocolate to it. Strawberry with a little bit of chocolate to it. We've got fiber involved. What I'm liking from some of these choices is fat, some fiber, and ultimately a little bit lower sugar just in general. The veggies made great muffins are awesome. I don't know if you've had these. They're in the freezer section. They're over, where breakfast products are in the freezer section, and there's lots of flavors. There's a chocolate one, kind of similar to what I'm making today. There's a blueberry one that sometimes I think is nice to have at breakfast, but these are great if you want a little sweet treat. The Lily's, I'm actually using Lily's brand chocolate chips today in the muffins that I'm making. Lily's has a little less sugar. It's sweetened with a little bit of stevia. And so it doesn't have as much. So be aware that can sometimes, not a lot of people, I think, have strong reactions to stevia, but sometimes people may. So keep that in mind. That does use a little bit of stevia in that brand. Down there on the far right or bottom right, that's avocado chocolate pudding. I don't know if you guys have ever had that. It's so good. I've actually made chocolate frosting out of avocado as well. Do not knock it. It's really good. And love the little outshine popsicles. Sometimes you just need a little something sweet. These are no sugar added. And, great options here to just have on hand when you really want something. All right, guys, thank you so much. We're going to get into making these muffins now. So I'm excited to feature these. These are chocolate protein muffins that use Greek yogurt. They have, what else do they have in here? A little peanut butter. So they have the Greek yogurt for the protein. They have the peanut butter for some healthy fats. We are using applesauce instead of sugar. So I want to make that note that I'm doing that. So when you do that, okay, guys, when you're going to use applesauce instead of sugar, oftentimes you use maybe applesauce instead of oil, but we're using applesauce instead of sugar. So you're going to want to reduce the amount of liquid that you have in your recipe just by a little bit. So what I've done is instead of half a cup of the unsweetened almond milk, I've halved that to a quarter cup, okay? And I'm using 1-to-1 ratio of applesauce to sugar. So it calls for a quarter cup of sugar. I'm using a quarter cup of unsweetened applesauce. So those are the only modifications in the recipe here. So I'll throw that out. All right, so I've got my oven set to 350. I've got my muffin tins over here already sprayed down. Best thing about baking is having things kind of ready to go, pre-measured, as you know, maybe a couple of things. I know making things from scratch, baking wise, can seem a little daunting at times. Do it on a day where you have a little bit more time. Maybe you measure some things out ahead of time to make it easier for yourself. But there's not a ton of ingredients in this particular recipe, in my opinion, just kind of a standard muffin recipe. So we are going to go ahead and whisk together our dry ingredients first.
A lot of people are wanting a little bit of clarification on when you say like approximately 17 grams of sugar per day. Is that natural sugars plus added sugars?
Okay. Well, I don't think 17. Oh, that was maybe teaspoons. Okay, so when it comes to added sugars per day, so if you go back to this, I think everyone will have access to the slides. So there's going to be a range that you see between 22, I think, to 45. If you're looking at both World Health Organization and American Heart Association, that's added sugars, not total sugars. We're just talking about added sugars within that recommendation. And when I'm talking about 5% versus 10% total calories coming from, we're talking about added sugars only. Okay, not natural sugars. Yeah, good question.
Perfect. Okay, a lot of people are also asking about sugar alternatives, your fake
Mhm.
sweeteners and things like that. What's your take on those?
So luckily, there's a lot of natural alternative sweeteners out there these days, like stevia for one. I really just tell people, hey, let's be aware of aspartame, sucralose, some of these non-nutritive sweeteners that are truly artificial that we know are causing a lot of concern. The other thing that's kind of coming out is some sugar alcohol. So erythritol would be an example of a sugar alcohol and its effect on gut health. So ultimately, I usually tell people if you have any really strong gut health issues, I would be aware of sugar alcohols and any of the artificial sweeteners that I just mentioned. When it comes to some of the other sugar alternatives that are more naturally occurring, like stevia, I would say, and monk fruit is another big one that's out that's really good. There are certain times and places for them when it comes to using them in recipes. Sometimes the product is a little different texture wise. So sometimes in certain baking recipes, you can get away with it. I've just decided to use applesauce instead for this particular recipe, but you could use a different sweetener if you wanted to. It just might make the product taste a little different. So, yes, so that's kind of my take. They are okay. Also, they are hyper sweet. So, this is something that we talk to people about artificial sweeteners or non-nutritive sweeteners, naturally occurring sweeteners that, like the monk fruit, even, they can make products sweeter, really sweet. And sometimes that does drive our sugar cravings. And so that is something to keep in mind. I would say to kind of be aware that we just don't want that in everything, but it can have a time and a place. So, yeah.
Think one other question a lot of
Okay.
folks are wondering a little bit more about the magnesium,
Uh-huh.
specifically what type, or is there one specific type that you would recommend?
The type that I usually recommend because, usually I'm finding there's a stress component as well with the sleep. That's a big culprit, and that can drive sugar cravings. So we oftentimes, as a whole of our practice, will recommend magnesium glycinate. And so there's like five different forms of magnesium. So, and it just kind of depends on what's going on. So that would be something that we could help someone figure out. But magnesium glycinate is a form of magnesium that's going to supplement you magnesium ultimately, but it's got something it's going to have a little bit of this glycine that's going to help with sleep and calming. It's great for right before bed and great for kind of that calming stress reduction. Not to take, it's not a magic pill here, but it is something that we have people give a shot. And I personally take it at night, and it is noticeably different when I take magnesium than when I do not. I will go ahead and say that. All right. So first thing I'm adding is a cup of all-purpose flour. So I'm going to dump that in my bowl. I have a half a cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. I have a teaspoon of baking powder, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, and a fourth a teaspoon of salt in this little container right here. So I'm going to dump that in. All right. Now, I would have put sugar in there. However, I'm using applesauce, and that is going to go into my wet ingredients. Okay. All right. And the chocolate chips will go in at the very end. All right. So I've got my dry ingredients. So that was the flour, the unsweetened cocoa powder, and the baking soda, baking powder, and salt. Okay. So for my wet ingredients, I will be adding some eggs, 2 large eggs. I'm going to be adding that fourth a cup of applesauce. I'm going to be adding that cup of plain Greek yogurt, which is what's adding a lot of that protein to the mix. I'm going to be doing a quarter cup of the unsweetened almond milk, a quarter cup of peanut butter, creamy peanut butter, a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Okay. So I've got my 2 eggs that I've already whisked up. I've got my quarter cup of applesauce. I've got my quarter cup of unsweetened almond milk. I have a cup of plain Greek yogurt. Okay. I have a teaspoon of the vanilla. And then I have a quarter cup of some creamy peanut butter.
Someone's wondering if you could use almond flour to cut down on the carb count.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, you could use well, I would maybe have to look this up. Sometimes you have to take into consideration the gluten-free varieties of flour. So I would probably and I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head, but of course you can make these gluten-free. Yes. So there might be a consideration of some adjustment with liquid with the gluten-free powders, or flours. But yes, you could definitely use almond or a gluten-free all-purpose. Yes, you could do that.
Cool. And then one person is wondering if you have suggestions for protein bars that don't add a lot of sugar and protein powders as well.
These are great from Costco. They do not have anything artificial sugar to them. They're just not sweet. They don't have a lot of sweet to them. So sometimes people enjoy that. RX bars are really good as well. So I recommend those a lot to people. When it comes to powders, this is my go-to. I use Orgain almost every single day. Vega One is another. These are plant-based proteins. You could do collagen. We talked about that last time. So Aloha is a really good brand as well. So for bars and for protein powder. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guys. So what I'm going to do is real quick, I'm going to mix up. So I've got our wet ingredients stirred up, that peanut butter and everything just kind of whisked in really well. I did not need a blender. Okay. So you don't need a blender for this recipe, even with peanut butter and all. It mixes just fine. And so I've got my dry ingredients. I'm just going to kind of whisk that up in here, stir it. And then as you can imagine, I'm going to add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients. And what's nice about this recipe is that it is a balance of those macronutrients. We've got fat, we've got protein, and we have really low sugar. So less than 10 grams of sugar for this entire for a muffin, which is really good. The wet ingredients. And then I'm going to just stir this up. Any other questions while I'm just stirring here?
Not many. Somebody's wondering about date sugar instead of the applesauce.
The date sugar, like DATY, or I mean E.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, you could do date sugar. I mean, date syrup, maybe, or date sugar. So I have date syrup that I've used for recipes, but date sugar, maybe. I wouldn't know. I'd have to look it up. But yes, one of the great things about date syrup is I use it in replace of honey, and it doesn't add added sugar, whereas honey does. So date syrup is going to be a natural sugar. It's still sugar, but it's just a nice way of reducing those added sugars. All right, guys, the fun part and necessary part. I would never omit these, okay? So we have half a cup of the Lily's chocolate chips here. Okay, so I just got these semi-sweet chocolate chips. And I'm going to dump those in and just fold them in. They look very fudgy. So now I'm just going to bring my muffins over here, my liners, and just fill them up about 3/4 full.
Hey, Katie, did you spray your liners?
I did.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And why
Sorry.
is
Yeah, I
the
did.
batter so thick?
Huh?
Why is the batter so thick? Someone asked that.
It's a little thick because I took a little bit of the moisture out with the unsweetened applesauce.
Gotcha.
But the muffins do come out a really nice consistency, even though the batter is a little thicker. So it's just, yeah, how the recipe is, I guess, or maybe how I did it. I'm going to put those in the oven. So it's at 350, and you're going to bake them for anywhere between 13, 15-ish minutes. So yeah, I'm going to just pop those in. Okay. All right, guys. So we have got completed muffins here. I actually added a little chocolate chips from on the top, but I didn't do that with these. But yeah, so they are a little bit kind of, I don't know how to, they're good. They're not like super moist. You could have added like a little bit more I don't know, maybe I think the applesauce will help too, but they're really tasty. They give you just like that nice, yummy chocolate, but not also, knowing that you're getting some of those more wholesome ingredients, some things that you can do that I saw. You could kind of drizzle a little bit of peanut butter over the top if you wanted to. I didn't do that, but you could do that. So yeah, I mean, hopefully you kind of learned though a little bit throughout this that it's not always just about omitting and avoiding a lot of these sweets. It really is, about how to balance it all. And so that's just one thing that I challenge you guys, to do for yourself. Questions? Anything else? I know we're kind of nearing the end here.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are still having trouble kind of wrapping their head around like what is a natural sugar versus an added sugar. Specifically, how is the date syrup natural sugar versus the honey and added sugar?
Because the date syrup is from dates. And so that's more of that whole food. So natural sugar is coming from foods that are like we talked about, just kind of fruits and milk and nuts even and vegetables kind of naturally occurring. When we add, I know the honey part can maybe be a little bit confusing. I think that's probably the only one though. I mean, most of it does make sense in my opinion, but I can help explain that maybe further. Maybe we need to do another session on just sugars in general, but as far as added sugars, it's things that foods that have been added sugar to it. So, like candy isn't naturally occurring sugar, it's not necessarily a whole food. Usually, more of your whole foods are going to have those naturally occurring sugars, and foods that are more processed are going to have those added sugars. So, hopefully, that list, when you kind of look at that list and then you look at the other, it maybe makes sense, but I can understand if maybe the honey is a little confusing for sure. But date syrup is coming just from dates. So that's why it's not added.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right. I think the honey is just confusing. On a similar note, someone wants to know specifically if raw unfiltered honey is better to use.
Yeah, I mean, raw honey, it has a little bit more nutrients involved there, but it's still an added sugar. I use honey. And the thing is, you don't have to omit these things from your diet. There is that allowance of added sugar to exist. So I think it's just learning, hey, are there certain parts of our day where we're using added sugars that maybe we don't need to be? So I think that's where I kind of would steer people instead of feeling like you have to just cut everything out. Yeah. I use maple syrup, I use honey, I use stuff like that in baking and drizzle like a little honey sometimes over plain Greek yogurt with fruit. I think it's okay. Again, I think it's just being aware of how we're consuming these added sugars in a whole day and where we can minimize and cut back.
We are all set. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys.
Learn more and discover your potential at lifestylemedicalcenters.com.